Okay then. So good afternoon, Phil. How are you?
Good afternoon, Richard. Very well, thank you. Very well.
Very good, very good. We are obviously here to talk a little bit about UK property with a particular reference to London, of course, and asking the question, is London property back? Which I think is quite a germane question at the moment, given that, for the last certainly, probably 10 years, Phil, it's definitely been a little bit, the focus has been north, really, in terms of UK property. So I think it's quite a useful question to ask.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, certainly over the last few years, we've seen a significant sort of shift, changes, and it's been quite an exciting time for the rental market.
So, well, first of all, just to introduce myself, my name's Richard Bradstock. I'm the founder and managing director of the RPA Group. We are, as I mentioned just now, I'm sitting here in Dubai. We are UAE headquartered, albeit we have offices and representation all over the world, including the UK, Nigeria, Hong Kong. And Phil, you're sitting in the UK.
That's it. Yeah, we're based in the UK, looking after all the UK assets.
Very good. Yeah, Phil is the founder and managing director of Brick Management and Lettings, who are our partner on that side of the business. So just to, I suppose, move on, we are here to talk about London property, to actually work out and to ask the question, is London property something that investors in the UK should be thinking of at the moment? What is the outlook for property prices, rental values over the next few years? What's been happening over the last few years in both rental and capital values? If you are going to buy into the UK and into London particularly, what constitutes a good investment? Obviously, there is a lot to London, including these days, commuter belt locations, which are, realistically, 20 years ago, no one would even consider as being London. And so from our perspective, we're going to then talk a little bit about the opportunity we believe there is. And we are aiming to keep this to 30 minutes or so. And if we do run out of time and we don't get to your questions, please be assured that we will reach out to you and make sure you get the answers that you need. So first of all, who are the RPA Group? The essential idea behind what we do is that we offer a one-stop shop solution, if you like, to people who want to buy property in the UK from an investment standpoint. We have an awful lot of experience, clients in every continent, as it says there, and through our sort of network of partners, with particular reference obviously here to Phil and Brick Management, we were able to provide the full gamut of solutions for anyone that wants to buy property in the UK. And the essential idea is that we are trying to keep this as simple as possible, as hands-off as possible. Obviously, property, as you will know only too well, Phil, is not ever completely hassle-free. Sadly, if only it were. But
as I say, with any investment, it's as good as it's well looked after and managed and maintained.
Absolutely, and that's obviously what we're here to do. So moving on to to London, and I think I sort of alluded to this already, but what does London mean? We talk to people every day who say, I'm interested in buying property in the UK, and I'm interested in buying property in London. And the reality is, probably, not that long ago, 20 years ago, really, people would only really refer to London as probably zones 1 to 4, possibly 5, and that would be about it. If you think about the underground map. From a property perspective, we tend to split it into 5 separate sort of components. So you've got prime central London, which is your sort of Mayfairs and Kensingtons and Oxford Street and the Soho and these sort of areas. You've got outer prime, which then, these days as London develops and as prices rise and as areas get regenerated, what we term prime central London and outer prime actually it gets larger and larger. So this would include all of Zone 2, and even some parts a little bit further out, and then Greater London. I've got Greater London twice on the list there. It's supposed to be Greater London and Commuter Belt London. Greater London, of course, then, if we look at the map on the right-hand side with Big Ben standing proudly in the middle of it, Greater London, we'd be looking at places on like Barnet and Enfield. You can see in the north there, or Kingston and Bromley and Sidcup in the south and southeast. Now, Commuter Belt London and or the southeast for us is actually a really interesting investor play with relation to London as well, because this is property that where from places like Reading in the west to places like Esher in Surrey to Maidstone and Ashford in Kent and places in Essex. These are towns and cities which are outside of what is traditionally London and their own sort of entities in their own right, but which, because of transport links and so on, are they're anywhere from sort of 20 minutes to an hour commuter belt or commuting time into central London. And as prices rise and pressure on rents increases, these places are coming increasingly into play for the for the average investor looking at London as an investment. You live in Woking, or don't you, Phil?
Again, prime commuter belt. Yeah, I live in Guildford.
Exactly. Sorry, Guildford. Yeah.
So again, sort of 45 minutes into London Waterloo, and I suppose it's the best of both worlds. You get all the city centre and London on your doorstep, but in the same breath, you've also got rolling countryside and parks and such like, which are readily available.
And more affordable property, ultimately.
Exactly, and again for again personally, and for a lot of my friends, now that they have to perhaps only commute into London 2 or 3 times a week, it lends itself well to enjoy sort of both aspects to that.
And I think so. If we, as we sort of move on through the presentation, I think from an RPA perspective, we are looking at property from a purely investment standpoint. So what we're looking at is value. Obviously, location is incredibly important. And we're looking for locations which have the best opportunity for growth. Now, London as a whole has an enormous supply and demand problem. It has the biggest shortage of supply of any town or city or area within the UK, and I've got some figures to show you that in a second. The population continues to rise. Still, 1/4 of all jobs in the UK are in London and the immediate surrounds. The average household's getting smaller, so there's more pressure, therefore, on property. And within London itself, I think actually preference for rental is possibly slightly the wrong way of putting it, thinking about it. But people are being forced to rent for longer, aren't they? So from your point of view, Phil, with your typical London tenants, what sort of age are we talking for these people?
Yeah, I mean, for generally speaking, our sort of tenancy age is probably sort of 40 and below, generally 40, 45 perhaps. But again, offering a sort of a rental versus purchase, a lot of our tenants are happy because it gives them the flexibility, perhaps in a more global world where perhaps they may relocate internationally with their jobs and they don't necessarily want to be tied down and committed. So I think preference for rental, we've certainly noticed, is now no longer deemed the lesser.
No, sure. I mean, I think culturally it remains something that every the old sort of what's the phrase? An Englishman's home is their castle. Everybody aspires to own the flat or the property that they live in. And so whilst absolutely, in this international world, there will definitely be people choosing to rent. I think I remember, 20 years ago, I think the average age that people bought their first home was something like 28 or 29, whereas now it's sort of mid to late 30s. So what we're seeing, therefore, is as well as that people choosing to rent, we are also seeing people being forced to rent for longer, which, linked to that lack of supply, pushes the rent prices up, right?
Yeah, exactly. And London specific, a lot of people were quite comfortable to rent in London with a long-term vision of perhaps buying further out of London when they, in their sort of their life where families and such like come into play.
Absolutely. And I think, and that sort of plays into our investment strategy from an RPA perspective, in that, look, we absolutely believe that if you buy well in, sort of central London, in a good location with a good developer, it will do well over the coming years. But because of this, these supply and demand pressures putting, causing prices and rents to rise, there is this natural movement for people then, as you just said, sort of to move out. So a lot of the investment angle that we look to cover, or we believe will offer the best possible returns over the next 5, 10, 15 years, it's probably not Mayfair and Kensington and places like that. Those are locations where people buy either because they want the status of living there, or having a place there, and obviously they can afford it, or they want to simply protect their money, right, in probably what is one of the safest real estate markets in the world. If you're actually looking for a bit more rental income, a bit more yield, a bit more house price growth, then it's the Greater London, outside of that prime central London, where you're going to get increased rents, and so on. So just to touch on the numbers, as you can see from the screen here, the government the government and JLL actually are similar in terms of the numbers that they're putting forward for total number of homes needed. I think the government have quoted something like 400,000 homes a year needs to be built across the UK to meet demand. Obviously, according to JLL's rental housing estimate, 300,000 homes are needed. You can see ultimately that with these sort of numbers being bandied around, ultimately there's just this enormous shortfall. So a shortfall of 196,000 homes. It's becoming harder for developers to build. The costs have risen, cost of land has gone up, interest rates are higher, and so all this leads through to the fact that planning consents, as you can see at the top there, are down a third from the previous year. So we're in a situation where population's rising. There is an aspiration for people to own their own homes. Interest rates are coming down. The Bank of England have now had 2 or 3 rate reductions. I can't remember now. 2, I think, over the last sort of few months. So more people are going to be buying property, more people are going to be renting property, and yet you can see there in that graph on the right-hand side that the biggest housing need across the whole of the UK, which is the dark blue bar chart line over the London on the London section, it's way outstripping what is being built. So the sort of the grey line there, which is just over 40,000, that's planning consents granted to Q3 2024, and yet it's under half of what's required. So we are in this situation where, and that's, obviously there is variation in different locations within London and surrounds as to where that need is most dire. But if you can buy in locations where that shortfall is most evident, this can only, in the end, lead to rental and capital value increases. In terms of average price performance, so in 2024, London prices increased by 2%. That's Savills, and you can just see, ultimately between really 2017 through to 2024, there hasn't been an enormous price rise in London property. And I think that, again, is where the opportunity lies over the next 5 or 10 years. Because in that same period, places like Manchester and Birmingham have outperformed London significantly. But with the rental increases that we've seen, and Phil will touch on these in a second, and the fact that we haven't seen significant price rises in London for quite some time now, this lends itself to, I think, if you buy sensibly, to real, really positive future growth. And we have got some numbers on that. So you can see, again, different numbers there quoted by both JLL and Savills, but 20% growth, 22, 21% growth over the next 4 years. I think that's pretty solid. And what you'll notice is that the prime central London, sorry, bear with me, I can't see because of the prime central London there, being predicted to outperform very slightly from a growth perspective, but I think the major difference will come in the yield. So, Phil, a question to you, and sorry, I'm aware I've been talking non-stop for the last 5 minutes. We did say this would be conversational, didn't we? But just from your perspective, could you just give a little bit of a summary of how the difference between renting something in Mayfair versus something in Zone 5? What sort of yield differences in your experience are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose sort of really underpinning what you were just saying there, Richard. For the rental market throughout London is actually supply and demand. So we find when we list properties for rental, actually it's a case of we're sort of inundated with inquiries with prospective tenants, and for us it's about sort of qualifying and getting the right tenants in place. And what we will find in terms of demand is, generally speaking, obviously prime central London, it's a bit more niche, it's a bit more elite, more expensive, shall we say, in terms of the sort of tenant demographic, whereas we find the bulk of inquiries will tend to be on the more commuter or greater London, where prices are perhaps a little bit more affordable for most. And in terms of, I suppose, sort of yields, it's reflected in the fact that where there's greater demand, i.e. on the sort of greater London commuter belts, the yields are stronger than perhaps they would be in prime central.
I mean, from experience, I mean, certainly from my side of looking at new developments and pricing them up and then looking at the rents and so on, as a general rule, obviously the more central you are, that yield percentage drops off significantly, right? So, traditionally places like Mayfair and these super prime, you're talking 2% as a 2 and a bit, 3, maybe 3 if you're really lucky, but even that's probably pushing it. Whereas as soon as you get a bit further out, you're touching 4s and 5s, and further out again even more. So
certainly. As I say, I mean, obviously over the again recent years on the rental sort of being achieved, probably in the last sort of 18 months or so, we've seen sort of rentals, generally speaking, increase by about 14%. So it's really helped.
Wow.
That really helped the effectively on the yields. On the overall annual income.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the fact that those London and Greater London yields are now looking so much more positive than they used to, certainly, pre-COVID, actually, London yields were significantly lower than somewhere like Manchester or Birmingham. Whereas now, actually, if you're looking in places like in some of these locations, 20 minutes from city centre, you're actually in some areas competing or even outstripping what is now achievable in central Manchester or central Birmingham.
Definitely. I mean, we've seen obviously post-COVID, that sort of shift of return back to the office, maybe more this sort of hybrid working where more and more emphasis is returning back to the office, perhaps particularly with the sort of younger generation where perhaps they're in their early stages of their career, so it's an important part of their job training and such like. So I was going to say it's becoming ever more so sort of popular.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll let you talk a little bit about this, but obviously it kind of just builds on what we're saying, really.
Exactly that. I mean, obviously, the sort of the impetus really is on the rental inflation. It's, we've seen as the lower sort of rental market, so where perhaps the volume of the tenant pool is larger, the greater the rental increment that we have seen in terms of appreciation, which ultimately, of course, affects the rental yield achieved by investors. As a London average, I mean, you'll see there obviously as a rental, it's over 2,000, so 2,200 per calendar month as an average London rental. Come outside of London in the sort of commuter belt territory, so Guildford, we made reference to before, and such like, that obviously effectively is nearly sort of 50% lesser.
Yeah, and that bottom point, like. Your sort of belief would be that in terms of the biggest rental increases moving forward. I saw a stat actually that I think for Kensington in 2025, their JLL were predicting 1% growth, whereas places like these commuter belt locations, you would expect to see more, I would imagine.
Oh, most definitely, and again in terms of I suppose sort of the foundation to it really comes down to affordability. In terms of, we touched on before, the high levels of employment in and around the whole area. Salary increments have been widely publicised, obviously, over recent years. There is still an affordability uplift to be seen.
Absolutely. A question we get all the time, and in fact, I think we asked people to send in a few questions beforehand as part of the sort of registration for this, and one of the questions I saw on one of the gentlemen that was attending was, what type of property should we rent? And it's obviously houses, semi-detached, maisonettes. So from your point of view, I mean, obviously the answer's sort of there, but tell me from your perspective, Phil, what your thoughts are on that.
Get asked it all the time. I suppose in short, the properties that are best for rental most certainly are the purpose-built flats and apartments. Reason simply being, I suppose, that tenant demographic, sort of 40, sub 40, they're not necessarily wanting the gardens and the hassles of maintenance and such like. And
probably not married or less likely to be married, less likely to have kids.
Exactly that. But also it just, generally life's busy, isn't it? So there's less maintenance and upkeep for on properties. And the fact that, again, if travel is involved with work, it's quite easy to lock and leave. And, if you are away for, a period of a week or so, it's not secure.
No, absolutely. And the other thing, of course, is that, apartment blocks tend to be built in city centre locations, don't they? Which lends its or more densely populated locations, which leads to more demand and closer proximity to jobs, and so ultimately that it's fairly clear. What the new build property thing is interesting, because when I first started working in London property 20 years ago. Everybody wanted the 2-bed Victorian converted flat with high ceilings and bay windows and all the rest of it, and which are lovely, but obviously they have problems, and there has been a definitive shift in really probably since COVID as much as anything else, and since we've had inflation problems and cost of utility bills, electricity, heating, all that sort of stuff. But the new build property is interesting. So, again, from your perspective, you said it just now, that's a clear winner in terms of, from an investor's point of view, what's going to achieve the best results, right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, obviously, for us to list properties for the renter in the rental market, we have to publicise the EPC, so the Energy Performance Certificate, and it's something that many tenants are sensitive on.
Yeah.
It's all about efficiency. It's all about good Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah.
And again, in terms of running costs, it's on most people's radar as a priority. So, people do prefer the new build double glazed units as opposed to a single glazed bay windows in a Victorian conversion. They like the fact that they don't have perhaps damp or a lack of underheating. It's, like I say, the modern flats provide the modern solution for the rental market.
And I think the other thing, from a investor's point of view, in terms of the capital values of those property, because they are more in demand, in the end, that translates to capital value increases, because they are, for the same reason why people rent one of these properties, i.e. it saves them £100 a month on an electricity bill. It does lead both to a higher rental price, because people can actually afford to pay slightly more for that property, which may have amenities or whatever it might do. And then secondly, on it's exactly the same reasoning. If you're going to buy yourself a starter flat, or maybe you've got married and you haven't got kids yet, and you're buying a 1 bed or a 2 bed with your spouse, again, it's exactly the same reasoning. It's cheaper and more efficient to live in these properties, for buyers as well.
I would say one of the things that is most noticeable for us and our landlords is the fact that, again, in terms of costs, as a landlord, having an older property, it does come with costs associated in terms of general upkeep, wear and tear, and such like. I see it on the monthly statements. The new builds are very lean machines. They're very little sort of output, shall we say, or coming from the rental income. Another major advantage for many of the landlords.
Absolutely. And then just finally on this sort of new build point, is the other thing, of course, is that Victorian terrace house that's been converted into flats is probably, if it was done, more than 10 years, it's probably got a 99-year lease, or maybe 125-year lease. Every new build property will now come with, in London generally comes with a 999-year lease. So it's a virtual freehold from that perspective. And it will also have zero ground rent attached to it. Whereas older properties still have ground rent, and that can be a problem when you're selling. To my own experience, selling a property in West Drayton, I had to pay for an indemnity insurance to allow the buyer's bank to lend on it, because the ground rent was, the ground rent policy wasn't very friendly. Quite frankly, it was expensive. So, new build properties, as of I think it was 2021 or 2022, there isn't zero ground rent. So again, new build property will facilitate an easier sale in the future generally than an older property with a less well thought out lease ultimately. Time to let, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, this really is sort of just some stats that we collated, pulled off the system just prior to today. Just to, again, it really emphasises, I suppose, the sort of supply and demand imbalance. I made reference earlier on that we can list a property and we have to sort of brace ourselves for incoming inquiries and phone calls, and that's been pretty consistent really since post-COVID. Average national average for listing a property to finding a tenant, 25 days there for a 2-bed. For brick, I mean, again, I've just run the averages for January. Again, it gives you a great idea of where the market is, and I suppose the sort of the efficiencies to my team. We're way below that at 11 days. Yeah,
absolutely. And you tend to deal in new build stock, so that would also help, given what we've just talked about, right? So the product that you're offering is obviously also quite important.
Oh, definitely.
Maybe you could, obviously you're the man on the ground, as it were. These are numbers that Savills and JLL have come up with in terms of, future rental growth. But how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to concur. I mean, to say again, in terms of seeing the rental increases that we've had over the last 18 months, 2-3 years, fully supported. Obviously, Savills, you can see there, they're anticipating rental growths of, in excess of 14% as an average. And in terms of sort of, outer London, slightly higher, and obviously that's over the last 5 years. Based on our record, our portfolio we got under management, we've seen similar rental increments to that probably within the last 3 years. So yes, I think it's probably fair to say as the rental market, steps forward, of course, affordability may have its play where it slows down and sort of, reduces some of the increase. But I would fully support what is being projected here by Savills and JLL.
Yeah, absolutely. But also that affordability element you just mentioned, as we sort of said before, in the end, it probably just pushes, if someone ideally they want to rent somewhere like Clapham, they go, but they can't afford it, they go out a zone or two, and then eventually they end up in places like Guildford or, because it's just that little bit more affordable.
Exactly that. It's very common to see people taking a few steps, a few further stops down the line, or and actually, in reality, if you've got to put an extra 10 minutes into your commute, for fast forward a week or so living in your property, it becomes a new routine. It's not a major issue.
And particularly given there is definitely an element of working from home still for a lot of people, and even if it's a day or two a week, as you mentioned at the beginning. So wanted to just talk a little bit about examples of the type of assets that we're dealing with here. So I wanted to just highlight 3 opportunities that we're currently working on. Aspen, which is our central London offering, the Triangle, which is our commuter belt, that's down in Kent, but still only 30 minutes, 29 minutes into Stratford from there. And Crowngate, which is our brand new site that we went to see actually about a month ago, didn't we, Phil? Brand new site, which will be launching in about 3 weeks' time. So first of all, Aspen. So this is Canary Wharf, and Canary Wharf is an interesting one because when it was first built, for years actually, probably for 20 years, it was somewhere that really people didn't want to live. It had no nighttime economy, people worked there and then left. Over the last 10, 15 years, it has transformed itself, and it's now home to Michelin-starred restaurants, to shopping malls, to bars, and is without a doubt one of the safest places in London. One of the things that we often get asked, and I'm sure there will be people on this call, on this webinar, who have joined for this reason. One of the is sending children to university in London, and they want somewhere that's super safe. There's very little places safer than Canary Wharf in London. So somewhere like this, ticks that box. In terms of the building itself, so it's this one with the sun glinting off it here. It's now it's literally in the process of handing over its final units. I know, Phil, you're in the middle of doing sort of viewings and taking photos and all that sort of stuff for it, aren't you, at the moment?
Yeah, exactly that. We've got 4 or 5 actually that we're just onboarding currently. It's been great to get in and see them, and obviously because of the height of the building, as you can see there, the views are fantastic.
They are phenomenal. Yeah, they really are phenomenal, and you can see, obviously it depends slightly which side you are and so on, but from most of the units you can see the river, you've got views of the city, you've got it's really lovely. You've also got a Dorset hotel which literally joins the building, so in theory you can actually get room service. You can order to your apartment, and obviously this is central London, so prices are a little bit higher than what we're going to show you in a second, but for anybody that is looking for something central, that wants a super safe investment in a very safe sort of low crime location, this ticks that box. It really does. Now moving on to the triangle, so completely different kettle of fish to Aspen, a little bit less shiny in terms of it's not a 63-story tower. However, it is a collection of 3 buildings, 140 odd units in Ashford in Kent. Now, I grew up in Ashford or just outside Ashford, so I can verify how much it has changed in 20, 30 years. Now, Kent is, along with most of the southeastern counties, one of the more affluent counties, one of the wealthier counties, but it is a town that, to be honest, when growing up in the 90s, it needed a coat of paint and a bit of a freshen up, and it needed some investment into it. And over the last 10 or 15 years, that has happened. And this is without a doubt one of the most successful projects that we have been involved in. It is on Victoria Park, so you have fantastic sort of green open park space just nearby. You have 5 minutes walk from the train station, and from Ashford train station. This is why, despite the fact that technically it must be 80 miles from central London, we still consider this as a London commuter belt investment play, because it's 29 minutes on the high speed HS1 on the high speed train into Stratford International, and 36 minutes into St Pancras. So you can literally be in central London door to door quicker than I could have been when I was living in Clapham. It's that it is that well sort of connected. 999-year leasehold, and as you can see, prices here significantly cheaper than central London, of course. So in terms of available units, because this has sold incredibly well, in terms of available units, you're talking about 1 beds in the sort of 220 to 240 range, and 2 beds about they did originally start at 250, but 290 to about 350, depending on size. But they've all got balconies, they've all got terraces. You can buy parking with it. Very sensible, solid layouts. I know you've been down there a few times, Phil, and it's finished really nicely as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it's finished really nicely. It's going to be a nice community, the way that the three blocks sort of intertwine. Yeah. One of the things I would say about the development actually is, which is going to be highly sought after, particularly on the rental market, is that each of the apartments have its own balcony. So again, post-COVID, it is that outside external space. Obviously, and again, obviously, for having a balcony, a lot of them look over and look at the park and such like.
Yeah, absolutely.
A nice place to live.
It really does. It really does. And then this is Crown Gate, which is our new development that we are launching the week of March the 10th. We are in the process of putting it all together as we speak. But really, really excited about this one. So this is in Surrey. Surrey traditionally is wealthier, more sort of better to do than Kent is. And this is in a village, I suppose you'd call it, called Claygate. Technically part of Esher. Esher is a slightly more famous name. But you're 39 minutes on the train from Claygate station into Waterloo. You can get to Victoria in a similar time. And this is really interesting, I think, from my point of view, because often, and obviously we've just been talking about, particularly with Aspen, a big, shiny, high density, very impressive looking site. But from a pure investment standpoint, sometimes these small little boutique developments do exceptionally well. We had one in Putney a couple of years ago, Phil, that both sold and rented extremely well. And again, that was only 7 units. This is 14, and I think, again, with this, because of its location, you're 5-6 minutes walk from Claygate station. As I say, 39 minutes into Waterloo. Every unit comes with parking. This isn't a finalised CGI. There will be. It's actually missing a couple of balconies on there, but there'll be. Most of the units will have balconies or a garden if they're a ground floor unit, and it's a gated little community. So what's not to like ultimately? But yeah, the
smaller developments always also prove very popular on the rental demand, because again, I suppose it's a bit more sort of personalisation, and I suppose, it's particularly out of London. You know, a 63 tower building would look out of place in each. So, yeah. But yeah,
exactly.
it's exactly what the market warrants.
And it's a genuinely like Claygate, Isha. These sort of, you've got Cobham not too far away, which is again quite a well-known name. It's where a lot of the Chelsea footballers live. This is a wealthy part of the world and a very attractive part of the world. It's a lovely little train station, high street village. It's really, I haven't been in there, but a very lovely looking pub directly opposite, the Hare and Hounds. It looks sort of quintessentially English, if you like. So obviously, I think for anyone on this call who would like more information about these, we'd be only too delighted to have a chat, understand what you're looking to achieve, and really give you some advice as what might sort of suit you better as investors. Obviously, a key part of that investment is the letting and management angle, and so obviously we've been talking a little bit about that, but perhaps Phil, you could tell us how it works.
Yeah, certainly, Richard. When speaking to many investors, of course, their first or one of their main concerns is, particularly when they're based outside of the UK, is who looks after the UK asset for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
For ourselves, Brick Management and Lettings, as we touched on earlier on, we're based in the UK. We actually offer nationwide lettings and management service to all landlords, and something that we do all in-house. So with that, I mean, we've got properties from Southampton to Newcastle and anywhere in between. And my team, in short, will collect keys on post-completion when you've actually bought the units, snag apartments for the investors on their behalf. We would obviously advertise and view properties and do viewings for you, provide feedback, etc., in terms of tenant demand and such like. We would obviously mutually agree a suitable tenant with yourselves and then do all the references and contracts. We would do the inventories when they move in, collect the rental, do property inspection. So in short, we offer a full managed service, hands off for landlords, so full peace of mind, even though you are many miles away from perhaps the asset itself.
Absolutely. And obviously I'm just slightly aware of time. We don't necessarily need to, there's some fantastic numbers on this, but one of the things that stands out to me is the sort of occupancy rates that you guys achieve.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, in terms of occupancy for ourselves, we run near on 100% full occupancy across the whole portfolio. To give you an idea, I think last year, we took on 473 new full managed properties, and again, out of our whole portfolio that we run and manage, 97% of those experience no rental avoids or for arrears, which of course is another big question for many landlords.
Absolutely,
that security of income.
In fact, that was another question that came in terms of how do we protect people against I suppose a tenant that doesn't want to pay or void periods and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in terms of, as landlords, I think we've got a slide actually I've got on for a rent protection product that we actually got. But in short, most of our landlords will uptake a rent protection cover, Richard, which I suppose guarantees their rental income, whatever the situation. Tenants, as with anyone, you can have change of circumstances, ill health, marital split, redundancy, whatever it may be. And should it ever mean that the tenants can't pay the rental, we have a product in place that basically negates that risk. It covers the rental income for any void periods. It covers legal costs and expenses in order to get vacant possession back of the property, and covers a period for us to re-advertise the property to ensure it's refilled and the income continues.
Absolutely. And I think on one hand, I was talking about this to someone this morning. On one hand, it is comparatively rare that this happens because there's an enormous amount of work around the tenancy sort of credit checks and all this sort of, profiling to the tenant to make sure that they are the right candidate to start with, right? And obviously, but I think this is absolutely worth the money because you just don't quite know, and it is incredibly cheap, really.
I mean, I always say to landlords, let's assume your rentals, keep the maths nice and simple for me, Richard. Let's say it's £1,000 a month. So,
Yeah.
12,000 for income over a year. You wouldn't drive a car uninsured. Why
No,
would you not protect your income?
absolutely, absolutely. And then there's a few other bits and pieces you can help people with as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, for our services, it's a full handhold. So yes, obviously with the property and finding tenants, collecting rents, dealing with the maintenance management or whatever it may be. But actually, we offer a sort of a full encompassing service as well. So should you have your annual tax return, we've got in-house that we can provide that for you, because again, self-assessment can often cause a chill for many landlords.
Yeah.
Concern as to how and what to do, we can look after that for you. But we also, again, will offer the full service. So, should you 5 years from now look to dispose and dilute your asset, we offer a resale service again for you, for landlords as an exit. And of course, in any time during that ownership, should there only be any remortgaging? So again, you touched on interest rates dropping.
Yeah.
Many of our landlords now is a good time perhaps to have a look at a portfolio review to see
Yeah.
if they can perhaps get cheaper lending, which again only further strengthens the yield that they're going to be taking.
Absolutely. Yeah, and actually, just on that point, as RPA, we can, if you are sitting there thinking, actually, I've had a property for 15 years or 20 years in London, not only will that property have gone up so seriously in value to the point where actually with rates dropping, it might be worth a simple sort of look at a refinance to pull some money out to do something else with, to make your money work harder for you. But clearly as well, if you're sitting there thinking, well, I've got these properties and I'm having a problem with the agents, or I don't think I'm getting enough, then Phil and his team would be only too happy to review those for you and see whether they can ultimately provide a better service and better results for you.
Yeah, I'm happy to run appraisals, no problems at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think property is an interesting one because we as RPA we sell it on the basis of sort of buy it, we'll manage it, and forget about it. But actually, there comes a point where you can't forget about it because maybe you haven't got the rental increases, maybe you haven't got the best mortgage deal, maybe you haven't got, maybe you could pull £100,000 out of something at relatively low cost, or and go and buy 2 other flats with it. It's obviously we as I say, we sell it on a buy and forget model, but it is important to assess this periodically, and obviously again through Phil and RPA and and everything, all our other partners, we can help you provide that service. Obviously we've touched on Aspen already, Phil, but that's just obviously these are, and obviously mentioned Putney too, but these.
I mean, it was just a few stats really there. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
the one on the far right, Putney, for example, that's a bit more of a smaller boutique development. But again, it just gives an idea in terms of, on that day, the first viewing day that we have 4 viewings, and again, I think we've received multiple offers on there, and again, that's one where again, in terms of rental increases year on year, we've achieved rentals of over 5%, and it's long-term tenants.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously Aspen, as mentioned, which in that picture is slightly misleading. It's not the square one in front. It's the rounder, softer sort of styled one behind it. But again, these
the rentals there, Richard, that are being achieved. So again,
yeah, exactly.
Touched on what it's a bit of, it's almost a community. It's they're buying into, or the Canary Wharf as a whole, the restaurants and the shopping malls and such like.
Absolutely.
So, rentals are healthy, 3,500 or so for a 2-bed.
Very good. Yeah, really good. And look, so hopefully that was interesting for everybody on the call. Thank you very much for joining us. We have had a couple of questions come in. I think I said at the beginning, perhaps very optimistically, that we were going to do this in half an hour. I think it's been about 45, 50 minutes. So we'll do a couple of questions, but what we will then do is pick up the sort of any other questions that we've missed in conversations offline, and we'd be only too delighted to have a chat. So please do reach out to either Phil or I, or any members of the RPA or BRIC team that you may already be in contact with. But the first question is actually a fairly prosaic one. Average length of tenancy in London, and furnished or unfurnished?
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I get asked that quite a lot, actually, Richard. In terms of average length tenancies, over a whole portfolio within London and Greater London, it's in excess of 2 years.
Is it? Okay, that's longer than I thought it was. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just in excess of 2 years. In terms of the furnished, unfurnished question, generally speaking, within London, the demand and the preference does tend to sway towards furnished properties. Probably on that understanding, young professionals turning up with, sort of, I suppose, sort of minimal possessions as such. But you will find, of course, in terms of offering the furnishings, it certainly helps in terms of timescales for being able to let it and the turnaround. Certainly that's my experience, that if something's furnished, it will let a little bit quicker than if something's unfurnished, right? Very true. Yeah. And that's true probably across the UK as well.
Yeah, exactly. And actually we've got a number of questions which are sort of variations on a theme, asking about other parts of the UK, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Brighton, other locations, and sort of comparing investing London in and to them. I think to answer that question, for me, it's actually very difficult to answer that question sort of without knowing the context of who it is that's asking the question, because I am a firm believer, and remain a firm believer, have always been a firm believer in London and the opportunity that London has. In the end, it is still the most in demand, property market in the world. More people buying in the UK and London specifically than any other market around the world. And so, that's not showing any signs of particularly changing, even despite Brexit and all that sort of thing. We as a business, as RPA, we offer property in Manchester, in Birmingham, in one or two other locations, other commuter belt locations around London, and I believe in them all, perhaps predictably, being a sales guy, but I believe that within our portfolio there is something, that will suit most UK property investors. And the important thing from my perspective would be to understand what you as the investor are trying to get out of it. Because if you are looking purely for yield and you're not really interested in capital value increases, then you probably actually want to stay outside the main city centres and look at something that is a little bit cheaper, but a little bit, that generates as a percentage a higher yield. If you want something that is going to sort of do a mix of both, then, to be honest, Central Manchester, Greater London, Central Birmingham, they all do pretty similar numbers in many ways. The difference will be that London tends to be a little bit more expensive. So look, I believe in all of these locations, and it just comes down to working out for you as the investor what is the right way forward for you to go. What other considerations are you thinking about? Is it purely numbers, capital value increases, rental, numbers, or are you half thinking about buying something with a view to university education? Or there's so many different reasons why people buy, and or it could be, I just want to protect my money. I've got, I'm sitting here in Dubai in what is a great but very volatile market. Maybe you've got a whole load of property in Dubai and you just want to put something in a very safe location. You've made a whole load of money in the last 5 years in Dubai, and you want to put some into a safe location like Aspen, and you're not quite so worried about the rental yield. So there's lots of different ways to answer that question. I think, in short, they all work, but it boils down to what you as the investor are trying to achieve, and that's what we as RPA are here to do. So we'd love to have that, have a chat, have a coffee, have a Zoom, have a slightly more in-depth conversation. I've also noticed there's a couple of questions coming up around tax, but given time and the fact that I am not a tax expert. That might be something that we can pick up offline, and we'll endeavour to come back to you. Anything else, Phil, from your side?
No, I think you've covered that quite comprehensively. I think all I would just say is, again, in terms of for the rentals, is location often for the developments that you do buy into within centres and such like. And as I say, certainly the products you made reference to are the location is A1, so that only is supported, in course, in terms of the rental demand.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, look, I think it only remains for me to say thank you very much for joining us today, Phil. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you in the UK before too long. And thank you to all our guests around the world in all sorts of different far-flung places. Looking at the guest list, I recognise quite a few names. So thank you very much for your time as ever. And we will. We look forward to taking it further and having further conversations with you. Thank you very much, everybody.